Good evening and welcome to Law and Order, brought to you exclusively by Channeleye. Each week we feature a guest on our show who is an attorney at law, who enlightens us on a particular aspect of the law which has practical relevance to our day-to-day lives. And one area that affects all of us in the same way is the sticky area of finances. And we need finances for our existence, from our basic requirements to even the more luxurious lifestyles that we might sometimes seek. And one way we do that is to generate an income through maybe the establishment of a business or a company and so on and so forth. And it is very rarely that we have the liquidity or the means, the funding that is necessary to establish these income generating ventures, and that is where banks and financial institutions come into play. Now, depending on our need, the type of financial product that we may have recourse to might differ, and we need some advice on how best to go about this entire process. And to assist us tonight, we have none other than Mr. Chanaka Jayamaha, who counts more than 14 years in the legal practice, and he is with us this evening to enlighten us on this topic. Chanaka, thank you so much for being with us this evening despite your busy schedule.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure. Would you kindly educate our viewers, drawing from your experience as a lawyer who specializes in commercial disputes, what type of financial products are available in the market that anyone can have recourse to, and what sort of needs those financial products can fulfill?
So, there are lots of products that financial institutions and banks offer, and from a very basic sense, you can go in for a loan, to the more common products which is known by a lot of people is like perhaps leases. Closely connected to leases is hire purchase as well. Then there's also factoring, which basically covers invoice discounting and check discounting as well. All of these products vary from one another, but I think what is most important is when you want to get a facility, you need to figure out first what is more suited for you. And also when you go to a financial institution, you are evaluated based on what kind of a security you can give. So, just because you want a facility, you are not going to be able to get it unless you can provide adequate security as well. So, based on, as I said, your requirement and on the basis of what kind of security you can offer, the product will obviously vary. So, as I said, so that would be the starting point, first to figure out what you need, what security you can give, and then obviously get into a discussion with your bank or your financial institution as to what is on offer and what suits you best. So, that would be the starting point, and also perhaps based on experience, something that I have realized is most people really don't evaluate what they are getting into at the point of getting into a financial transaction with a bank or a finance company. Most people complain once they are in default or when it is put to court, not realizing the fact that they should have got advice in relation to what they are getting into at the point they actually got into the transaction. And actually that is perhaps a big issue in our culture as well, where people wait till something goes wrong to actually get advice.
That's true.
And something that I feel is that people should start doing is to get advice at the point you are getting into a facility, where perhaps let us just say you go tomorrow to a bank or a financial institution and they say, listen, we feel that a lease is more suited for you, but before getting into a lease with that entity, you should study those documentation. Perhaps you need to get advice, see if that product is what is best suited for you, number one. Then number two, is it the sort of thing that you can sustain over a period of time based on your income or your assets, etc., etc. And also look at what if things go wrong, what do you do then? Because there are damage control mechanisms in these products as well. So, what happens is people don't resort to those damage control mechanisms even when they can't really pay their what you call monthly installments or whatever payments that need to be made, and then they wait till this goes to court, and then at that point when they start arguing, it doesn't really augur well for them, because they perhaps haven't resorted to the taking the correct steps at the right time. So, as I said, the most important thing is you need to first figure out what product suits you. You also need to analyze how you can pay it, because that's also going to be one of those main factors to tell you what product suits you. And number two, you also need to really evaluate from a legal point of view, what product suits you and what are the implications of getting into that particular facility. That should be the starting point in most instances, as opposed to retaining a lawyer when things go pear-shaped and then perhaps arguing that things have gone wrong. Because even then, we see quite often people going to court, and because they've defaulted on facility, and these defenses, most of these defaulters don't hold much ground, because they're complaining at the wrong stage, because the underlying factor is that they're in default. They've taken a facility, they've defaulted, and then some of these excuses people come up with don't really carry much weight. So, as I said, the starting point should be to get good advice before you get into the facility.
So, just so that our viewers have a basic idea of what these different facilities are, so that at the end of this show they would be a little smarter when they go next to the bank or the finance company to obtain a facility. Let's take something as simple as purchasing a vehicle. Now, there are one of three options, I believe, that are available to us. Either we take a loan to buy the car, or it could be by way of a lease or a hire purchase. Could you just enlighten us on the distinctions between these three options, and so that our viewers could be better aware when they choose next to purchase a vehicle?
In a general sense, in all three products, you will end up paying something at the end of the month.
Yes.
So, most people would look at it from that point of view first. But in actual fact, the products do have distinctions in themselves, in the fact that if you take a loan, it's not often is the vehicle tied to the loan itself. There are instances where banks or financial institutions will give you a loan where it's based on your credit worthiness, where they might feel that you don't need to secure the facility by pledging your vehicle as such. On the other hand, if you take a lease or a hire purchase, the vehicle is directly connected to the facility. Now, if you look at, say, compare lease and hire purchase, once again, if in a general sense both products are more or less the same, but there is more security for the party who takes the facility if you obtain a hire purchase facility, because that is actually more like what the term suggests. It's actually designed for you to pay a monthly hire, so that you can ultimately purchase the vehicle at the end of the whatever period.
High period.
While most people assume that when you take a lease, it's the same thing.
Yes.
But
common misconception is
actually that is so, because the thing is, if you go through most lease agreements that banks or finance companies have, you don't get any ownership at the end of the day. It's optional.
Yes.
People assume that you're going to get ownership, and most likely if you have paid all your rentals throughout the period of that facility, you're most likely to get the vehicle at the end of it. But if you go through the agreement, you will realize that it's discretionary. So, that's the real distinction between hire purchase and leases, while, as I said, in the case of a loan, it's not directly connected. Now, another factor to keep in mind is most banks and finance companies ask for a pledge of the vehicle in a loan as well, which ends up being similar to a lease and a hire purchase agreement as well. But the thing is, if you were to compare the three, the law that governs those three products is perhaps what you need to consider at that stage, because if you take a hire purchase agreement, the Consumer Credit Act applies, and there is more safeguards for the party who gets the facility. versus a loan which has the least amount of safeguards. So, now if you take a loan, what would happen is there is no specific law covering loans apart from the general law. So, then assuming something goes wrong, for instance, you can't pay up and they go and sell the vehicle, for instance, at a point you are in default, you might not really be able to rely on a particular provision of law, which you would have in the case of a hire purchase agreement, which is governed by the Consumer Credit Act. Similarly, leases are also covered by the Finance Leasing Act as well. So, there are some safeguards, but from the point of view of the party who gets the facility, in my opinion, the most amount of safeguards are in place for a hire purchase facility.
Yes.
But strangely, the common trend is to go for a lease. Because I think the concept of leasing has been made more popular through marketing.
Yes.
So, people think that leasing is the product to go for, when in fact, as I said, unless they are actually aware of what they are getting into, are they going to get the vehicle at the end of the facility, what are the safeguards they have, etc., unless they really identify those things, you might not realize what you are getting into.
And lease, it's important for us to remember that essentially what is taking place is you are paying the company to be able to use the vehicle.
Correct.
And each month you pay something to the company so that you can continue to use the vehicle.
That is exactly what a lease is.
Exactly.
If you were to define it in terms of
property,
law. Yeah, even in the case of a property, that's the same thing. But there is that misconception that a lease is pretty much like a hire purchase agreement, where it's a process where you pay some monthly installments so that you can get ownership at the end of it, when in fact that's not the case.
So, now in the case of loans, you mentioned that there is a requirement for collateral or security to be offered, even if it is not for a vehicle, say it is for property or something akin to some form of asset. Now, this security can come in the form of the very product or the asset which you are seeking to purchase, or it can take any other form. Would you be able to pledge something else that you own as well?
Generally, you should be able to pledge anything you have ownership of, but banks or financial institutions tend to prefer assets in the form of either a vehicle or property for that matter. Because as you know, if you go to pledge, say, equipment, there is very little hold a bank or financial institution has over that, because there is really no mechanism of really monitoring where those goods are they in good working order, etc. So, banks tend not to give facilities even if you have that as a security. They might not be too keen to give a facility over equipment. So, if you do have a land, that is of course one of the best securities you can offer, and when you go to get a loan, especially if it's a large value loan, you would the bank would request you to pledge, not pledge actually, to mortgage that property as security. Interestingly, there's also this new trend where people think that you can get a loan through your credit card, because that is one of those products where you don't have to give any security because you already got it.
Right.
It does have a credit limit as such, and you don't have to go in for another application as such. So, people tend to take it. But what they don't realize is that the interest rates are very high.
Yes.
As opposed to getting a standard loan.
That's right, yeah.
So, people for convenience avail themselves of that opportunity to take a loan through their credit card, and then at some point when they default, realize that there's a large amount of interest that you need to pay for. So, that's the thing. So, you need to really consider those aspects as well when you take a facility.
Now, you also mentioned factoring and check discounting. Could you just enlighten us a little bit on what this is?
Factoring is not actually very common in Sri Lanka as much as it is perhaps in other jurisdictions. Factoring is actually a fabulous product for people, especially small time businesses as well. Actually, it is availed of by larger businesses as well because of how the system works. Factoring can be broadly categorized into either check discounting or invoice discounting. How it works is basically you sell your debts to the financial institution so that you can get some money up front. I mean, to explain it further, assuming you're a, let's just say you have a retail, some shop down the street which you sell, say, groceries, for instance. What happens is most of your customers would purchase goods, but on credit. So, assuming you were to sell goods to the value of 1,000 rupees today, your customer would undertake to pay that 1,000 rupees, say, in a period of 30 days. So, you have given out your goods, you haven't got money, but all you have is an invoice which is a credit invoice.
Yeah.
So, now most businesses find it hard to sustain themselves because they need the money up front. So, factoring helps you to sell those debts to a finance company. So, what you would do actually is you would go to a finance company, negotiate with them and say, listen, I am in this, say, taking my example of a grocery, I have a grocery, I have customers who generally come and get goods on a 30-day credit period. I need to factor those invoices so that I can get the money up front. So, they will look at your, evaluate your credit worthiness and say, okay, perhaps we can give you based on your volumes a particular facility. Say, for example, let's say you are getting a facility of 1 million, and then what you would do is you will take those individual invoices and factor it to the finance company. So, what you do is you take a single, once you enter into an agreement, you will take an individual invoice which has a 30-day credit period, give it to the company and say, this invoice is for 1,000 rupees. I am supposed to get 1,000 rupees at the end of the month, but I am giving it to you now, please factor it and give it to me, say 95% of that money up front, because I need the money to continue with my business. So, what happens is, then when my customer subsequently pays me, it has taken 30 days, but I have also got the money up front. So, I need the fact that I have got it up front means that it is easier to do my business. Now, although it looks like a tripartite sort of a arrangement, in Sri Lanka you do not really have the tripartite system where it is a non-recourse kind of facility. In Sri Lanka you only enter in the common agreements are recourse facilities, where it is an agreement generally with the finance company and the party who factors his debts. So, the only difference is that the third party may undertake, or he may have the option of paying the finance company direct.
Oh, I see.
So, now like I said, so in the case of invoices, you can factor your invoices like that and get money up front, or alternatively you might be getting checks which are obviously dated ahead, post dated checks. So, in which case you can factor your checks as well. So, again you will be the finance company will be able to kind of realize the money much later, but you will be able to get the money up front based on this facility. So, it is actually quite a good facility to take if you are a businessman who needs money up front.
Cash flow, to help with the cash
because
flow
to manage your cash flow, that is one of those good facilities to take. But again, you need to assess what kind of charges are there, because there will be interest on it, there will be discounting charges, etc., etc. So, you need to analyze it from an accounting point of view as well, to figure out, by getting this money up front, how much will you end up paying as well. So, that is what I said, when a customer meets the bank or the finance company, they will look at it and say, well, I am getting my money up front, so this is a huge advantage, but they do not really negotiate on what they are paying back.
True.
So, as I said, but be that as it may, factoring, be it invoice discounting or check discounting, is a good product, assuming, yes. I mean, if it is something you need to help with your cash flow as such.
Very quickly, since we are tight for time, what about overdraft facilities?
Again, an overdraft facility is also similar to, I mean, I would like to think it is similar to getting some money on your credit card, because it is, yes, it means, now when you overdraw your account, it means that you do not have money, and there will be interest on it as well. So, two ways of getting it is, now generally if you want a proper overdraft worked out, you can actually get an overdraft facility where you will know upfront what kind of terms and conditions are there. But assuming you had a bank, assuming you had an account with a bank or a finance company over a period of time, they might even give you sort of like a temporary overdraft, which is at a point where your bank, your account is overdrawn. So, those are not really long term facilities as such. Those are those things which you take when you really get stuck. Now, those are not the sort of things I mean, I or any lawyer would advise you to take, assuming you are looking at a sustainable business.
Because also the interest rates are very high.
Interest rates are high, and it's actually not the prudent thing to do. I mean, the prudent thing would be on the part of the customer is to, as I said, evaluate what is your present requirement, how well you can pay it, and how that repayment affects your business as well. So, unless you analyze those aspects, you might be getting into a lot of trouble by just taking an overdraft facility or drawing on your credit card as such.
So, the overdraft facility is only available to those who have a current account, because it's only a current account that can be overdrawn, and you can get either a temporary or even a permanent. So, I mean, how long would the permanent overdraft be in effect?
That's negotiable. That's negotiable. But if you are getting a permanent overdraft, again, most likely the bank or the finance company will ask for a mortgage or a property. So, they are not going to give you a permanent overdraft for a large sum of money without security.
Right, Chanaka, thank you so much. I believe that within this short span of time, we've been able to cover the entire gamut of financial products, and I'm sure our viewers appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you've shared with them within this short time. That's all we have the time for, unfortunately, but we will be meeting Mr. Jayamaha again next week, when we will be going deeper into this topic, which is of great importance to each of us. And before we do, I would like to sign off by saying thank you to Mr. Jayamaha for joining us in the chamber.